Alright, so I'm going to explain how those late stage defensive mechanics work for the outside or inside heel hook there. It's actually pretty simple, but unless you know what it is, it might not make any sense to you. Alright, so one of the main things to focus on when you're applying leg locks, or actually looking to do leg locks generally speaking, is the relationship between your hips as the offensive man and the defensive man's primary leg. Okay, so basically look, your hips can be facing into three main points of his primary leg: the back of his knee, the side of his knee, or the front of his knee. And which of these you want is heavily dependent upon which stage of the leg locking game you're in. Okay, so if you're looking to gain heel exposure, you don't have a heel hook yet, right? The optimal angle is for your hips in relationship with his primary leg is to have your hips facing into the front of his knee. Okay. Alternatively, you definitely can work well with your hips facing into the side of his knee. But if your hips are facing into the back of his knee, there's really nothing you can do. However, let's contrast this with when we're looking to actually break people. When you're looking to actually break people with a heel hook, you need to have your hips facing into either the back of the knee, that's where you would start to employ rotational breaking mechanics, or the side of the knee, that's where you would start to employ lateral breaking mechanics. Now, if your hips are facing into the front of the knee, you can do kind of like a dog shit knee bar, but you can't really do a heel hook. So in both of those cases, what we saw is that the defensive man realized, okay, my heel is caught. At that point that your heel is caught, you don't need to worry about heel exposure anymore because he already has it. So that game is lost, right? So, okay, so let's think to ourselves. If the disadvantage of having our knee facing into his hips is that he can expose our heel, but our heel is already exposed, and the advantage of such an orientation for the defensive guy is that he can't really effectively break you with a heel hook, well, if he's already got our heel, then that is now like something good for us rather than bad for us. I would never advise, if he doesn't have your heel, to face your knee into his hips, because guess what? That's how you're going to get your heel exposed, okay? So if you don't have your heel exposed, the first thing you should be trying to do is make sure your heel does not get exposed. But if it gets exposed, at that point, it doesn't matter, obviously. So turning to have your knee pointing into his hips is actually a pretty good late-stage defensive mechanic, because what it can do is it will relieve breaking pressure from the lock, and from that point, you can start to either go deeper into another entanglement to counter. That's what Marcin Held did against Musa Kamanev in the MMA fight. Or you can look to free your knee from his knee line by pushing at his hamstring or opening up the wedges, all sorts of things. There's various ways you can do that, okay? That's what William Walk did against Eddie Cumming. So those are like the two different sort of directions you can take things after you've achieved this advantageous defensive angle, right? You've got your heel caught, so you roll faster than him, so that now it's not the side or the back of your knee facing into his hips, but rather the front. That's not what we want when he doesn't have our heel, but when he does have our heel, that can be used effectively to relieve breaking pressure. Once you're there, once you've achieved that angle, you've got to act fast, because if he's good, he's gonna start moving and shifting course, right? So you got to either pull your knee out of his knee line, or you've got to heel slip or toe slip. And just a word of caution regarding this defensive mechanic. This is pretty advanced, guys, so I don't recommend beginners try this, okay? I mean, you're playing with fire, essentially, right? He has a heel hook on you, okay? So if you are a beginner, wait to try this, right? You need to get sensitivity to the breaking pressure. And also, I'd recommend doing it a lot with training partners you trust before you ever try to do it in competition or against people who you don't know. Okay, that's the safest way to make sure that when you're practicing this, you don't get injured.